That night, I called my son 3 times. No answer. Around midnight, the police called me. "Are you the owner of the Mustang that just crashed into a patrol car?" I rushed to the scene, but my son was already sitting on the curb, trembling as he pointed at me. It was him. He killed that girl. I was just trying to get away from him. My wife stood behind the officers and coldly said, "Just confess. Stop denying it." They thought the trap was perfect. But they forgot one thing, that Carr knew the truth. Thank you for joining me today. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, your country or city. Also, please note this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I'm sharing is truly valuable. I'd love to hear your thoughts. My name is Ray Callahan. I am 62 years old, and I have spent more than half my life underneath a car. I know what a failing head gasket sounds like before it fully gives out. I know the difference between a transmission slipping under load and a drivetrain shuddering at speed. I can walk into a cold garage, breathe in once, and tell you whether the last engine running in that room was burning clean or running rich. 40 years of grease and steel and split knuckles have given me a kind of mechanical instinct that most people would never understand. And honestly, I stopped trying to explain it a long time ago. What I could not diagnose, and what I should have seen coming long before that Saturday night in March, was the kind of damage that leaves no visible trace. No oil leak, no warning light, no sound you can isolate and name. Just a slow rot happening somewhere deep in the structure, invisible, until the whole thing collapses at once. I was still at the shop at 10:30 that night, finishing a valve cover replacement on a customer's truck that had been sitting on the lift since Thursday. The garage was quiet the way I liked it, just the hum of the overhead fluorescents and the occasional tick of cooling metal. I had turned 62 the previous October, and my lower back made sure I knew it by the end of every long day, but I had never once considered cutting my hours short. This place was mine. I had built it from a leased bay and a second-hand toolbox in 1993, and 32 years later, it still had my name on the sign out front. When I finished the job, I wiped my hands on a shop rag, killed the bay lights one by one, and walked out through the side door to the back lot where I always parked the Mustang. The space was empty. I stood there for a long moment, not moving, just looking at the dark rectangle of asphalt where she should have been. My 1969 Ford Mustang Fastback, built from a bare shell, hand-fitted, race-tuned, and driven to 4 regional finishes before I hung up my helmet for good. She was not just a car. She was the best and most honest thing I had ever made with my own hands, and she had been sitting in that exact spot every night for the past 11 years. I went back inside and pulled up the GPS tracking software on the office computer. The signal from the module I had installed was showing her last known position as the lot itself. The timestamp on the final ping read 11:47 p.m. The signal had not faded slowly, the way it does when a battery dies. It had cut out clean all at once, like someone had physically pulled the relay from the fuse block. I had installed that module myself. I knew exactly which relay controlled it. And I knew that the only people who had ever spent enough time in this garage to know the same thing were me, my longtime employee, Marcus Webb, and my son Derek, who had grown up in this building and could navigate every corner of it blindfolded. Marcus was home with his family. I knew that without checking. I picked up my phone and called Carol. She answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was flat, not sleepy, not startled, not the voice of a woman who had just been pulled out of bed by worry. Flat in a way that told me she had been awake and waiting, though, for what I could not yet say. "Carol, did someone move the Mustang?" "What do you mean, move it?" "It's not in the lot. The GPS signal cut out 45 minutes ago." A pause stretched between us. Not the pause of someone thinking, the pause of someone calculating. So maybe you misremember where you parked it. You've been putting in long nights. I have parked that car in the same spot for 11 years, Carol. I kept my voice level with some effort. Is Derek home? He went out earlier. I'm not sure where. What time did he leave? Another pause, shorter this time. Around 9, maybe. He didn't say where he was going. I ended the call and tried Derek's cell phone. 4 rings, voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. On the 3rd attempt, I sat down in my office chair and stared at the dark monitor, letting myself think clearly instead of quickly. The Mustang had a second layer of security beyond the GPS, a kill switch. I had wired myself running on a separate RF signal entirely completely independent of the satellite module. It was the kind of system I had learned about from a fellow racer back in the 90s, the kind of thing you install when you love a vehicle enough to want the final say over it. I could send the cutoff command from my phone, and as long as I was within roughly a quarter mile of the car, the engine would go dead. No override. No workaround, unless you had the emergency bypass code I kept written on a piece of masking tape inside the top drawer of tool cabinet number 1, the drawer that Derek knew as well as his own bedroom. I opened the kill switch application. The RF signal was broadcasting normally. At 11:52 p.m., I pressed the command. Somewhere out in Tucson, if my car was still moving, it had just stopped. I set the phone face down on the desk and sat in the silence of my empty garage, listening to the fluorescent light buzz above me. And I thought about the look on Carol's face the last time Derek had come to dinner. How she had laughed a little too quickly at everything he said. How she had watched him the way you watch something fragile, not with love exactly, but with the careful attention of someone managing a situation. 17 minutes passed. I did not move from that chair. Then my phone rang. Unknown number, Tucson area code. I picked up immediately. Wind. Radio static. The tail end of a siren powering down. Then Derek's voice, tight and slightly breathless, threaded through with something that sounded like crying, but had no real grief behind it. Huh, Dad? A pause. There's been an accident. Before I could form a single word, another voice came across the line, professional, close to the receiver, not waiting for permission. Sir, this is Tucson PD. Are you the registered owner of a 1969 Ford Mustang license plate 7 Tango Charlie 442? I was already on my feet, reaching for my keys off the hook by the door, moving toward the truck, before I had consciously decided to move at all. Yes, I said into the phone. I'm on my way. I did not know in that moment that going there was the single action that would be used against me for the next 8 months of my life. I did not know that the accident scene I was driving toward had been constructed, at least in part, for my arrival. I only knew that my son had called me, and that whatever a father is, he goes. I saw the emergency lights before I turned onto South Kolb Road, blue and red strobes pulsing against the low Arizona sky, throwing sharp shadows across the stucco storefronts that lined the block. I pulled my truck to the curb 100 yards short of the scene. The road was blocked by a second cruiser parked diagonally, and I got out at a run, crossing the distance on foot with my heart working harder than it had in years. The Mustang had hit the rear quarter panel of a Tucson PD cruiser nearly head-on. The front end of my car had collapsed into itself. The hood buckled upward at a sickening angle, steam still rising in a thin white column from the destroyed engine bay. The cruiser had been shoved sideways, its rear wheels lifted completely off the pavement. Broken glass from both vehicles covered a wide arc of asphalt, catching the strobe light in flashes that made the whole scene look like something from a nightmare you keep replaying after you wake up. I stopped for just a second and looked at what was left of 30 years of work. Then I kept moving because my son was sitting on the curb 30 feet away, and that mattered more than the car. Derek had a silver emergency blanket draped around his shoulders, the kind paramedics carry in the trunk. A female paramedic was crouched beside him, asking questions in a low, steady voice. He was answering in short responses, head slightly bowed, hands loose between his knees. He looked shaken, and I registered that with relief that dissolved almost immediately when I reached him and he looked up. I put my hand on his shoulder and crouched down to his level. Derek. Are you hurt? What happened? He met my eyes for a moment. Something moved across his face, controlled quick, a door swinging shut, and then he looked away toward the wreckage. I'm okay, he said. I'm fine. You're fine. I studied his face. Derek, look at me. How did this happen? Why did you take the car? Before he could answer, a voice came from my left, calm and authoritative. Sir, I need you to step back from him for a moment. I stood and turned. The officer who had spoken was young, late 20s, lean with the composed manner of someone who had learned early on how to manage a scene without raising his voice. His nameplate read, B. Tate. Officer Ben Tate, I would come to know, was good at his job in the way that made things harder for me that night. Ray Callahan, I said before he could ask. I'm the registered owner. He's my son. Tate wrote something in his notepad. Mr. Callahan, did you give your son permission to operate the vehicle this evening? No, I said. I did not. Tate looked at Derek briefly, then back at me. When did you last see the vehicle? It was in my lot when I started my shift at 2 this afternoon. I discovered it missing around 11:15 tonight when I finished up and went to leave. And you drove here without calling dispatch first. The question landed with a specific weight, and I heard it the way it was meant, not as curiosity, but as documentation. Why didn't you call us? What were you doing in that 40-minute window between 11:15 and now? I called my wife, I said, and my son. Neither one gave me a useful answer. Then I received a call from this location. I paused. I came because he called me. He's my son. Tate made another note. He had the practiced neutrality of a man who was building a picture piece by piece, and he was doing it correctly. I could not fault him for it. I just wished he was building a different picture. 2 other officers were working around the Mustang. I watched the one on the driver's side lean through the open door with a flashlight, scan the interior methodically, and then reach into the door storage compartment along the inside panel. He withdrew something and held it up briefly before setting it into an open evidence bag held by his partner. Even from where I stood, I knew what it was. The snap-on combination wrench part of a limited production 2021 series I had ordered specifically because of the forged alloy composition, one of a set I kept in the locked cabinet in Bay 2. I had never put that wrench in the Mustang. I kept it in the cabinet because it was a precision tool, not a road tool. It had no business being in that car. Mark that wrench, I said loud enough for Tate to hear clearly. It's from my shop. I did not put it in the vehicle. Tate looked at me steadily. We'll document that, Mr. Callahan. He said it the way you say something to a man you have already decided is lying, not dismissively, just with the particular patience of someone who has heard that line before and knows how it ends. I turned back toward Derek, needing to understand something, needing some version of his face that made sense to me. Derek. I kept my voice low, controlled. Tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them what actually happened tonight. Derek was looking at the ground between his feet. His jaw was set. He did not respond. Derek looked at me. He didn't. Tate and his partner were moving toward me then, and I heard Tate say something quiet to the officer beside him, not directing it at me, just relaying information, unaware or unconcerned that I was close enough to catch it. Dispatch confirmed the 911 call came in at 2:24. Caller was the son. Said the father had been drinking, killed a woman earlier in the evening, and was forcing him to help dispose of evidence. Said he was scared. The words reached me one at a time like blows that come in a sequence you can't brace for because you don't believe the first one is real until the second one lands. My son had called the police. My son had called the police and told them I was a murderer. I looked at Derek one more time. He had lifted his head now, and he was watching me from across the rubble of the car I had loved for 30 years. He was not crying. He was not afraid. He was watching me the way you watch a clock calmly, without feeling waiting for the hand to reach the position you already know it will reach because you set the mechanism yourself. Officer Tate's hand closed around my arm, firm and practiced. I let him lead me toward the cruiser. I did not fight. I did not shout. I simply looked at my son one last time over my shoulder, searching for something, anything that resembled the boy I had raised. There was nothing there I recognized. And somewhere in the cold, quiet part of my mind that still functioned while the rest of me was breaking, I understood that this was not the beginning of something. This had been building for a long time. The question that would keep me awake in a jail cell for months to come was not how he had done it, but how long he had been planning to. They put me in interview room B at the Tucson Police Department at 4:17 in the morning. The room was small and deliberately uncomfortable. A metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs on opposite sides, a mirror along the left wall that wasn't fooling anyone. The fluorescent light overhead gave everything a bluish, clinical tone, the kind of light that makes a healthy man look guilty and a guilty man look dead. I had been in rooms like this before years ago as a witness to a minor collision involving one of my drivers. That time I had walked out in 20 minutes. I already understood this time would be different. The detective who came in was named Hank Morse, a heavy-set man in his early 50s with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything roughly a decade ago. He was not cruel. That was what made him effective. He sat down across from me, set a manila folder on the table without opening it, and looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a car that's been towed in, not with judgment, just with the weary certainty that he already knows what's wrong and the paperwork is going to take a while. "Mr. Callahan," he said, "you've been read your rights. You understand you can stop talking at any point and request an attorney." "I understand," I said. "I don't need an attorney. I haven't done anything." Morse opened the folder slowly. He laid out 3 photographs in a row. The accident scene, the wrench in the evidence bag, and a photograph I had not expected. It was a wide shot of a residential property, a large house set back from a landscape driveway crime scene tape across the front entrance, and a Scottsdale PD unit parked outside. "Do you recognize this address?" Morse asked. "No. But it's in the Carefree area, North Scottsdale." He tapped the photograph. "A young woman was found there earlier this evening. Her name was Amber Cole. She was 24 years old. Cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head." He paused to let that land. "The tool we recovered from your vehicle tonight is consistent with the wound pattern." The room went very quiet. I could hear the ventilation system running in the ceiling. "I have never been to that address," I said. "I didn't know Amber Cole. I have not left the garage since 2 o'clock this afternoon." Morse pulled the folder open further and removed a printed sheet, a transcript single-spaced several paragraphs long. He slid it across the table and watched my face as I read it. It was the 911 call. Derek's voice had been transcribed word for word. I read every line twice slowly, the way you read something when part of your brain is refusing to process what the words actually say. "My father has been drinking. He drove to a house tonight, and I think he hurt someone. He made me get in the car with him. I don't know what to do. I'm scared of what he'll do if I try to get out. Please send someone to South Kolb. Please hurry." I set the transcript down on the table and placed both palms flat on the surface and breathed. "That is a fabrication," I said. "Every sentence of it. Your son sounded genuinely frightened, Mr. Callahan." "My son is 28 years old, and he knows exactly how to sound like whatever the moment requires." The words came out harder than I intended. I pulled them back a little. "Detective, I can tell you exactly what happened tonight. The Mustang was taken without my permission. I discovered it missing at approximately 11:15. I tried to reach both my wife and my son. When I couldn't, I activated the kill switch on the vehicle. It runs on a separate radio frequency from the GPS system independent range of about a quarter mile. Then I received a call from the scene and drove there. That is the complete sequence." Morse looked at me. "Why didn't you call us when the vehicle went missing?" I had asked myself the same question sitting in that office chair at 11:30, and I gave him the honest answer. Because my son's name was the first thing that came to mind, and I wanted to understand what was happening before I made a call that couldn't be taken back. That was a mistake in judgment. I know how it looks. Morse seemed to consider that. Then he pulled out one more item, a photograph of the wrench, close up the dark residue on the head of it, visible even in the low-resolution print. "The tool has your name on the purchase registration," he said. It's my wrench. It came from my shop. I did not put it in that car, and whoever did put it there had access to my building." Before Morse could respond, the door behind him opened. I looked up, expecting another detective. It was Carol. She was dressed as if she had taken time getting ready, neat blouse hair combed back. She did not look like a woman who had been woken by a crisis. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a particular moment to arrive. She sat in the chair beside Morse, not beside me. That single choice told me everything about the conversation that was coming. "Carol," I said, "tell him what you know. Tell him about Derek." She looked at the table between her hands. Her expression was composed and carefully empty. "Ray," she said quietly, "I don't know what happened tonight. I wasn't there. You knew he took the car. You told me to leave it alone. Those were your exact words." She shook her head slowly, just slightly, as if I had said something she found difficult to hear, but not surprising. "I think you've been under a lot of stress. You've been working every night for weeks." The sound that came out of me was not quite a laugh. "You're going to sit in this room and tell a homicide detective that I'm confused about my own wife telling me to stand down while our son had my car." She did not answer. She looked at Morse instead, and I understood then fully with a clarity that felt like something physical, like a bone going through a clean break, that she had made her choice before she walked through that door. Whatever she knew, whatever she had been part of, she had decided that protecting Derek was worth what she was doing to me right now. 35 years of marriage, and she was sitting 18 inches away and turning into a stranger with every second that passed. Morse cleared his throat. "Mr. Callahan, I'd strongly advise you to contact a lawyer before this conversation continues." I looked at my wife one more time. She was still looking at the table. "That's probably right," I said, and I stopped talking. But even as the room went quiet around me, one thought kept surfacing through everything else. One detail from the crash scene that no one had mentioned yet. The trunk of the Mustang. The bag of clothing the officers had recovered. I had installed a Halon fire suppression system in that trunk 2 years ago, a compact unit designed for race vehicles capable of killing a fuel fire within seconds. The trunk had not burned through. The bag had survived, and whatever was inside that bag had not been destroyed the way someone had clearly wanted it to be. I did not say any of this out loud, but I filed it away in the part of my mind that never stops working, the same part that listens to an engine and already knows where the fault is before the diagnostic is run. There was a story in that trunk, and I intended to find out what it said. The door to the Pima County Detention Center closed behind me at 8:14 in the morning, and the sound it made was not dramatic. It was just a door. A heavy door doing what heavy doors do. But there is a difference between knowing that a door can be closed and standing on the wrong side of it when it shuts. And I felt that difference in a way that had nothing to do with the mechanics of locks and steel. I had been formally charged with first-degree murder and evidence tampering. Bail had been denied at the initial hearing. The prosecutor argued flight risk and public safety, and the judge agreed without visible deliberation. I was 52 hours removed from standing in my own garage, and I was now wearing a county-issued uniform in a holding cell that smelled of bleach and someone else's despair. The first 2 days passed in a particular kind of silence that I had never experienced before. Not the silence of a late night in the shop, which is the silence of something waiting to be built. This was the silence of everything having already happened of consequence settling around you like sediment. By the third morning, the news had reached everywhere it was going to reach. A corrections officer told me not unkindly that there were reporters outside. One of the morning papers had pulled a photograph from my racing years, a wide shot of me on a victory lap at a Phoenix Regional in 1994, and had placed it next to a photograph of Amber Cole. The contrast was apparently useful to them. I did not ask to see the article. Carol came on the fourth day. She was escorted to the visitation room, a row of booths separated by reinforced glass communication through a mounted handset. I sat down across from her, and we looked at each other for a moment through that glass, the way two people look at each other when the conversation they need to have is one that neither of them knows how to start. She looked composed. Tired maybe, but composed. She was wearing the gray cardigan she always wore when she was trying to feel in control of something. "They're saying it's going to go to grand jury," she said. "I know," I said. "Ray." She stopped, started again. "If you cooperate, if you work with the prosecutor and explain what happened that night, they might reduce the charge. That's what Derek's lawyer said." I stared at her through the glass. Derek has a lawyer already. He needed representation. He's a witness. Carol. I kept my voice flat and even. "Our son called 911 and told them I killed a woman. He is not a witness. He is the reason I am sitting in this room." Her jaw tightened slightly. "You don't know what happened that night." "I know what didn't happen. I know I wasn't at that house. I know I didn't touch that girl. And I know that wrench came from my shop, which means someone with access to my shop put it in my car. If you'd like to have an honest conversation about who that someone is, I'm here. But I'm not going to sit across from you and pretend this is a misunderstanding I caused." She was quiet for a long time. "Then, I'm trying to hold this family together, Ray." "There is no family to hold together," I said. "There is only the truth, and there is the story Derek told the police. Those two things cannot both be true at the same time." She set the handset down and left without saying goodbye. I watched her walk out of the visitation room, and I noticed that her step was steady and her shoulders were straight, and I thought about what it meant that a woman could leave her husband in a detention center and still walk that way. It meant she had made her peace with the decision before she arrived. I was still thinking about that when the corrections officer came back to tell me I had another visitor. Marcus Webb had worked for me for 11 years. He had come to Callahan's garage at 24 with a trade school certificate, a battered set of hand-me-down tools, and a mechanical instinct that reminded me of myself at that age. In the years since, he had become the best employee I had ever had, and more quietly, one of the few people I trusted without qualification. He was 35 now, stocky, with the kind of steady calm that comes from having put in enough hours under a car to stop being rattled by things that can't be fixed with a wrench. He sat down across from me and put his hands flat on the counter on his side of the glass. He looked at me directly the way a man looks at you when he wants you to know he sees exactly what he's seeing and isn't going to pretend otherwise. I've read everything they published, he said. I don't believe any of it. You might be the only one I said, and then I'll be the only one. He said it without drama the way he said most things. Tell me what you need. I told him everything. The GPS relay the kill switch activation at 11:52. The halon system in the trunk. The wrench from cabinet 2, the bag of clothing the police had recovered. Marcus listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about him that I had always valued. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The kill switch log. The activation command that's stored on the app server. It should be. That's a timestamp. That's proof you sent the cutoff from a stationary position you weren't in the car." He leaned forward slightly. "And the ECU in the Mustang's racing seat you told me last year, you had the pressure sensor calibrated to your weight. 85 kilos. I felt something shift in my chest. The seat data would show whoever was sitting in it that night. Derek is about 70 kilos. Marcus held my eyes. Machines don't lie, boss. People do. I looked at him through the scratched glass of the visitation booth, this man who had shown up at my shop a decade ago with nothing but ability and integrity, and I felt something I had not felt since the night the Mustang disappeared. Not hope exactly. Something more structural than hope. A place to start. There's one more thing, Marcus said, and his voice dropped slightly. I went into the garage this morning to check on the equipment. Someone had been in there. Tool cabinet number 2, the lock had been forced. And the Snap-on series set the limited run from 2021. He paused. The wrench is gone. The one they found in the car, that's the one. I already knew that. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing the confirmation from someone who had stood in the same room and seen the same empty cabinet, made it real in a different way. Derek had gone into my garage and taken the tool he would later use or allow to be used, and then place in my car before the night was over. This was not a crime of impulse. This had been assembled piece by piece the way you assemble a machine, with patience, with foresight, and with the cold understanding of exactly how it would run when you finally switched it on. The question I could not yet answer, the question that would drive everything that came next, was how far back the planning went, and whether the person I loved most was the only one who had been building it. The holding cell smelled like bleach and old fear. Not the sharp kind of fear that hits you when a car spins out at 110 miles per hour. I knew that fear had lived inside it for 30 years on the track and come out the other side with nothing worse than a scar above my left eyebrow. This was the dull, grinding kind. The kind that settles into your shoulders at 2 in the morning and is still there when the fluorescent lights flicker back on at 6. Maricopa County Jail had a particular quality of silence at night, not peaceful but compressed, like the air itself was being held hostage. 11 days. That was how long I had been inside, sitting on a metal bunk, staring at a ceiling the color of old teeth, wearing a paper wristband with a case number stamped on it, like I was a piece of misplaced inventory. The charge sheet read, "Obstruction of justice and filing a false police report." Derek's legal team had moved with a speed and precision that made my stomach turn every time I thought about it. A 28-year-old kid who had spent the better part of his 20s avoiding anything that required sustained effort, suddenly backed by a legal machine running interference like a Formula One pit crew. Someone was funding that. Someone with money and a reason to keep Derek insulated from consequence. I just didn't have the name yet. On the morning of March 21st, the visitation room door opened, and a woman walked in that I had never seen before. She was around 45, with the kind of posture that comes from spending 2 decades standing in front of judges without flinching. Charcoal blazer, plain white shirt, no jewelry except a slim silver watch on her left wrist. She set a leather folder on the table, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down with the unhurried confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome before she walked through the door. "Grace Norris," she said, extending her hand. "Criminal defense. Marcus Webb called me 6 days ago. He said you'd be too proud to ask for help yourself." I shook her hand. "He's not wrong. He also told me you built every security system in that garage with your own hands." She uncapped a pen and opened the folder. "That matters more than you think. Tell me everything start from the moment the GPS signal went dark." So I did. I told her about 11:47 p.m. on March 15th, the way the tracking app on my phone simply stopped updating the cursor frozen over the intersection of Campbell Avenue and Glen Street like a held breath. I told her about the RF kill switch. I had built myself a custom unit because standard remote systems were too easy to exploit with relay amplifiers, and I had watched 2 neighboring shops lose vehicles to exactly that method. I told her about calling Carol and getting a voice so flat and rehearsed it made my jaw tighten. About Derek's phone rolling straight to voicemail. About activating the kill switch at 11:52 p.m. and then getting the call from the scene Derek's voice controlled in a way no genuinely panicked person's voice ever manages to be. I told her about the wrench, about Officer Ben Tate crouching beside the passenger door and pulling it from the floorboard like he was extracting a confession. About standing at the crash site in the dark, watching my son look at me with eyes that had already run the calculation and liked the result. Grace wrote without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't offer reassurance or sympathy. She simply looked up from her notes and said, "Good. Now let me show you what Marcus found." She reached into the leather folder and produced a sealed, labeled evidence bag. Inside was a clump of reddish-orange clay mud, the kind specific to the mineral-heavy runoff corridors of the Sonoran Desert, where iron-rich sediment bleeds through the rock after rain and stains everything it touches. She placed it on the table between us with the deliberate care of someone presenting a key piece of a puzzle they had been assembling for days. "Marcus pulled this from the undercarriage of your Mustang before the impound lot restricted access," she said. "He documented everything: time of collection, precise location, on the vehicle, full written chain of custody photographs, with timestamps on a separate device. He followed independent evidence collection procedure to the letter, which means this bag has a paper trail that any prosecutor will have difficulty challenging." She let that sit for a moment. "This soil is from the Carefree Highway corridor, specifically from the unpaved access road that runs behind Preston Holt's private property out in Cave Creek. That road does not appear on any logical route between your garage and the crash site on Route 77. There is no incidental reason for that mud to be under your car." The weight of it settled over me slowly, the way certainty always does when it arrives after a long wait. "The Mustang went to Preston's property that night," I said. "Before the crash." "Before the crash," Grace confirmed. "I have already reached out to a forensic geologist at the University of Arizona. The mineral composition of this sample is distinctive enough to be mapped to that specific road with a high degree of scientific confidence. If the lab confirms the match, we have independent physical evidence placing your vehicle at Preston Holt's property on the night of March 15th, evidence that stands entirely on its own without relying on your credibility as a witness." I stared at that bag of red-orange earth, at the dried, crumbling soil that had clung to the belly of my car through an impound lot, and a crime scene, and 11 days of silence waiting for the right person to notice it. "Hi, chum. There's something else," Grace said. Her tone didn't change, but something in her eyes did a careful tightening the way a person looks when they're about to hand you information they haven't fully processed themselves. "Marcus inspected your Halon fire suppression system, the unit you installed for track use designed to discharge suppressant if it detects heat signatures consistent with an engine fire. He found evidence of a partial discharge, not a full trigger. Just enough to release a trace amount of chemical agent into the rear wheel well area. I sat up straighter. That's exactly where you'd reach if you wanted to access the brake line without triggering the full system alarm. Yes, Grace said. Someone worked on that car while the halon system was live. They were careful enough to avoid a full discharge, but not careful enough to eliminate the chemical trace that a partial activation leaves behind. She set her pen down and folded her hands. Ray, I need you to understand what we are constructing here. Each piece individually is arguable, but together the soil, the halon residue, the kill switch log, they form a pattern. And patterns are what juries remember. For the first time since March 15th, I felt something other than the slow grind of helplessness. It wasn't hope exactly. It was colder and more focused than hope. It was the feeling I used to get on the starting grid when I had done everything right in the garage, checked every bolt, balanced every tire, and all that was left was to drive. Then Grace picked up the folder and held it without opening it. She was quiet for just long enough that I knew what came next was going to be different. There's one more thing, she said carefully. The kill switch receiver in your garage logged 2 RF signals on the night of March 15th. The first arrived at 11:49 p.m., a frequency that was not yours attempting to interface with your system. Your activation signal came in at 11:52 p.m. and overrode it. She met my eyes. Someone tried to take control of your car before you did, and they transmitted from close range. The room went still. Whoever had taken my Mustang hadn't acted on impulse. They had come prepared with technology built specifically to counter the one system I had trusted most. This wasn't rage. This wasn't opportunity. This was engineered, planned, deliberate. And somewhere out there, the person who had engineered it was still walking free, while I had spent 11 days staring at a jail cell ceiling, wondering where I went wrong. I looked at Grace and asked the only question that mattered in that moment. Who else knew that kill switch existed? She didn't answer right away. The silence that followed told me she had already been sitting with that exact question, and that the answer she was forming was one she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Grace secured my release on bail on the evening of April 2nd. By 7 the next morning, I was standing in the back room of Callahan Garage for the first time in 18 days, the small climate-controlled space I had converted years ago to house the shop's security server and ECU diagnostic archive. The room hummed with cooling fans and smelled like cold electronics and the faint residue of motor oil that drifted in from the main bay through the ventilation gap under the door. Marcus was already there. Seated in front of 2 monitors, a coffee cup at his elbow, a legal pad filled with handwritten notes beside the keyboard. He stood when I came in, and for a moment neither of us said anything. Then he nodded once the way men do when the words would take longer than the situation allows. "Show me," I said. He sat back down. The garage runs 4 exterior cameras, 2 covering the main lot, 1 on the bay entrance, 1 on the rear access gate. The primary footage from the night of March 14th was partially deleted. Not wiped completely, partially. Whoever did it had access to the primary recording directory, but they didn't know about the backup mirror drive I set up 8 months ago on a separate physical unit. It's air-gapped, no network connection, no remote access possible. They couldn't reach it, because they didn't know it was there. He pulled up the first file. The left monitor filled with security footage, grainy but functional, the timestamp sharp in the upper left corner. March 14th, 2025. 9:41 p.m. The rear access gate swung open. A figure entered, lean, dressed in dark clothing, moving with the unhurried ease of someone entirely comfortable in the space. Not searching, not hesitant. Familiar. The figure crossed the lot, disappeared into the main bay, and emerged again 14 minutes later. Walked back through the gate and pulled it closed behind him. Marcus paused the footage and zoomed toward the frame just before the figure turned from the camera. I didn't need the zoom. I had recognized the walk before Marcus touched the mouse. 28 years of watching that particular way of moving, first as a small boy crossing a driveway in the morning, then as a teenager who believed confidence was a substitute for effort. Then, as a young man who had quietly decided that everything his father built was beneath him. Derek, he was here the night before, I said. My voice came out level because I needed it to. If I let the full weight of what I was seeing hit me all at once, I would stop being useful. And right now, being useful was the only thing I had left to offer myself. 14 minutes in the main bay, Marcus said. That's enough time if you came prepared and knew exactly where you were going. He reached into the parts cabinet beside the server rack and set something on the desk. A small circuit board no larger than a deck of playing cards with a stripped wire lead on one end and two surface-mounted components on the other. I found this taped behind the rear seat brace during the undercarriage inspection. It's a programmable RF emitter. The components are available off the shelf, but the assembly is custom. Someone built this specifically to mirror and override your kill switch frequency at a pre-programmed time. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. Felt the surprising lightness of it, a thing this small, carrying this much consequence. This is what sent the competing signal at 11:49 p.m. I said. Yes. It was pre-programmed to broadcast at a frequency that would interfere with your remote activation, either prevent you from triggering the kill switch at all, or create a false activation log that would look like operator error on your end. The system wasn't sophisticated enough to fully override your unit, which is why your signal at 11:52 still connected. But the attempt is logged. Marcus pulled up the second monitor columns of ECU diagnostic data timestamps running down the screen in clean machine-generated rows. That's not the only thing the car recorded. He pointed to a specific cluster of entries. Your Mustang's ECU logs seat sensor weight data every time the ignition is cycled. It's a passive system, runs automatically as part of the airbag calibration protocol. On the night of March 15th, between 11:34 p.m. and 12:09 a.m., the seat sensor recorded a continuous driver weight between 168 and 172 pounds. Grace, who had been standing against the far wall with her arms folded and her eyes moving steadily between the two monitors, spoke without looking away from the screen. Ray, what do you weigh? 210, I said. And Derek, I already knew. I had known since the moment Marcus said the number. Around 170, the ECU log sat on the screen. Columns of data that had no motive, no loyalty, and no capacity for deception. Numbers recorded by a machine in the dark on a road while my car was being used to destroy me. Grace stepped forward and unfolded her arms. Individually, every one of these elements can be challenged by defense counsel. The footage is grainy, the weight data carries a margin of error, the emitter could theoretically have been planted after the fact. That is exactly why we do not present them individually. She looked at me directly. We present a corroborating chain. The soil places the car at Preston Holt's property. The halon residue places someone working near the brake line. The backup footage places Derek in this garage the night before. The ECU data places a 170-pound driver behind the wheel during the incident window. And the RF emitter accounts for the competing signal in the kill switch log. She paused. Each piece supports the next. A jury doesn't need certainty from any single element, they need to see a pattern that only resolves one way. I set the circuit board back down on the desk. My hands were steady. I had learned on tracks where the margin between finishing and not finishing was measured in fractions of a second, that the moment your hands begin to shake is the moment you have already lost. Can we identify who built that emitter? I asked. Trace the components, the assembly style, anything. Marcus opened his mouth to answer. Grace's phone buzzed against the metal desk. She picked it up, read the screen, and I watched something shift in her expression, a small, controlled tightening around the eyes that only appears when information arrives, before you're ready to evaluate its implications. "It's Detective Hank Morse," she said, setting the phone down slowly. "He's requesting a meeting tonight. He says his team ran a second sweep of the crash site on Route 77 and recovered something that was not included in the original evidence report." She looked up and met my eyes across the desk. He didn't say what it was. She didn't speculate, neither did I. But standing there in my own server room, surrounded by data that was building a case for my innocence brick by careful brick, I felt the unmistakable cold certainty that whatever Hank Morse had pulled from that roadside was going to shift everything we had just assembled one way or the other. The only question left was which direction it would fall. The desert wind had a way of finding its way through the cracks in Grace's office, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant rain. It was April 15th, 2025, and I sat in the leather chair opposite her desk, the one that had become my second home over the past few weeks. The case was eating at me, gnawing at the edges of my sleep. Derek's blood on that wrench, it wasn't just evidence. It was a ghost that refused to stay buried. Grace looked up from her notes as a knock sounded at the door. "Come in," she called. Detective Hank Morse stepped into the room, and the air shifted. He was 51 but carried the weight of 24 years in Tucson homicide, like a second skin. Broad through the shoulders, close-cropped gray hair, and eyes that missed nothing. He had a habit of watching your hands when you spoke, not your face, a habit Grace had warned me about. He carried a manila folder like it contained state secrets. "Detective," Grace said, gesturing to the chair. "Thank you for coming." Morse nodded, his gaze flicking to me for a fraction of a second, before settling on Grace. "Ms. Norris, Mr. Callahan." His voice was gravelly, the kind that came from too many cigarettes and too many late nights at crime scenes. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sat, opened the folder, and slid a photograph across the table without a word. Second sweep of the Route 77 crash site turned up something the first team missed. He set his eyes on me. 12 feet from the point of impact in the drainage ditch running alongside the shoulder, wrapped in a piece of shop rag, I picked up the photograph. A wrench. Not just any wrench, a snap-on model with a rubber grip handle the same brand and series as the one Officer Ben Tate had pulled from the Mustang's floorboard on the night of March 15th. But this one had something the first wrench didn't: blood. The lab confirmed human blood on the grip and the lower shaft. Morse continued, his tone flat, professional. "Type O positive. We ran it against the database. It matches a sample from a prior medical intake, Derek Callahan's, from a 2019 emergency room visit." He paused, watching my hands the way Grace had warned me he would. "Your son's blood is on a wrench found at the crash site. The wrench in the car had your prints on it, Mr. Callahan. This one has no identifiable prints at all, wiped clean. But the blood is Derek's." The room stayed quiet for a moment. Grace was already thinking I could see it in the way she held her pen without writing. "How does Derek's blood end up on a wrench at the crash site if he walked away without a scratch?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. That," Morse said, "is the question I've been sitting with for 3 days." He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "The official incident report from the night of March 15th states that Derek Callahan sustained no injuries. Officer Tate's notes confirm no visible wounds during the roadside interaction. No ambulance was called. No medical evaluation was requested. He tapped the photograph. So either that blood was deposited before the crash, meaning the wrench was in the car or on Derek's person when he drove, or someone placed it in that ditch after the fact. Either way, it contradicts the clean narrative Derek's legal team has been building. Grace set her pen down, her expression unreadable. Detective Morse, what is your current read on this case? Morse looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. Off the record. Off the record? She said, her voice steady. My read is that the first responding team closed the scene too fast. He said, his gaze shifting back to me. Tate's report is thin in places where it shouldn't be thin. I've worked enough crash scenes to know when a site has been managed when the story on the ground is just a little too tidy. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. I'm not saying your son had help from inside the department. I'm saying the scene was not treated with the care it deserved, and I want to understand why. That landed differently than I expected. Not the way good news lands, more like the way a door opens into a room you weren't sure you wanted to enter. You're looking at Tate. I said the words, tasting bitter even as I said them. Morse didn't confirm or deny. He simply closed the folder. What I'm doing is following evidence that was overlooked in a first report. That is standard procedure for a secondary sweep. He stood buttoning his jacket with a practiced motion. What you do with the information I've shared tonight is between you and your attorney. He looked at Grace. I'd expect a formal evidence disclosure request within the week. Make sure your forensic documentation on the soil sample and the ECU data is airtight. The blood on that second wrench is interesting, but interesting alone doesn't move a case. He left without shaking hands. The door clicked shut behind him, and Grace and I sat in the quiet of her office with the photograph still on the table between us. Hi, he's building something, Grace said finally, her voice low. He didn't come here just to share a discovery. He came here to see what we have and decide whether it's worth working parallel to. Is that good? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It means we're not alone, she said, picking up the photograph and studying it. But it also means Morse has his own objective, and it may not align perfectly with ours at every step. She slid the photo back into her copy of the folder. What matters right now is the blood. Derek's blood on a wiped wrench 12 feet from the crash site contradicts every element of his official account. We need to file an independent motion for access to that evidence before the prosecution decides how to characterize it. I nodded, but I wasn't thinking about the wrench anymore. I was thinking about what Morse had said the scene was too tidy, and I was thinking about the night of March 15th, standing at the crash site in the dark, watching Officer Ben Tate crouch beside the Mustang's open door. How quickly he had found that wrench. How cleanly he had lifted it. Like a man who already knew where to look. I had assumed from the beginning that Derek had acted alone. That the cruelty had been personal, the particular cruelty of a son who had learned to treat his father's generosity as a resource to be extracted. But if Tate had been there from the start, if the scene had been prepared before I even arrived, then this was something larger than a son turning on a father. It was a setup, and I had walked right into it. I drove home that night with the windows down and the desert air moving through the car, and I tried to remember every interaction I had ever watched between Derek and Ben Tate. Every moment that could have been a meeting I hadn't recognized as one. There were more than I wanted to count. The story is about to enter dark corners that even I couldn't have predicted. To let me know you're still riding with Ray Callahan in this fight for justice, drop a 1 in the comments below so I know you're still here. And please note the following story contains some fictional elements crafted for dramatic effect. If that's not your style, feel free to turn off the video right now. 3 days after Morse left Grace's office, Marcus called me at 6 in the morning. I picked up on the second ring. You need to come in, he said. Right now. And bring Grace. What did you find? Something that changes the shape of everything. He paused just long enough for me to feel it. Don't stop for coffee, just come. I was at the garage in 18 minutes. Grace pulled into the lot 2 minutes after me, still buttoning her jacket cuff as she crossed the gravel. Marcus was already in the server room, standing in front of the monitors with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way it gets when data has told him something he would rather it hadn't. Tunok, Grace said, pulling a chair to the desk without ceremony. Marcus turned to the first monitor. After the Morse meeting, I started tracing the RF emitter components. The parts are individually available, but the microcontroller chip used in that assembly is a discontinued model. Very few vendors in the Southwest still carry it. I tracked active supply chains down to 3 distributors. One of them processed a bulk order 14 months ago, 40 units. Payment came through a corporate account registered to an LLC. He pulled up the spreadsheet. Meridian Capital Solutions. Grace leaned forward. That name appears in 2 other cases I've worked in the past decade, both involving Scottsdale real estate. She looked at Marcus. Keep going. Delaware Shell Company. 2 layers of holding structures between the LLC and the beneficial owner. But the registered agent used a Scottsdale address, the same address on 3 other corporate filings. He clicked to the next screen. A property record. A name at the top. I read it and felt something go still inside me. Preston Holt. Hi, you know that name, Grace said, watching my face. From 20 years ago, I said. He bought naming rights to 2 racetracks I ran on in the 90s. Never cared about the sport, only cared about what the association could do for his brand. I leaned back. We stayed out of each other's way. I always figured that was the best arrangement for both of us. He didn't feel the same, Marcus said. He pulled up the 3rd screen bank transfer records flagged through a civil subpoena Grace's financial contact had obtained. Derek has been receiving monthly wire transfers from a holding account tied to Holt's primary LLC. Consistent amounts. 3rd business day of every month. He looked at me directly. The first transfer went through 37 months ago, Ray. The number hit me like a tire iron to the sternum. 37 months, I said slowly. That's 3 years before any of this started. 3 years and 1 month, Marcus said. Grace stood and moved to the window, her back to us for a moment. When she turned around, her expression had the focused clarity of someone who had just watched a scattered set of facts lock into formation. Holt didn't react to a situation, she said. He created one. He identified Derek, built a financial relationship with him, and spent 3 years positioning the pieces before anyone touched the board. Why Derek? I asked. Because Derek is your son, Grace said plainly. He had access, he had grievance, and he had a need that money could satisfy. Holt would have seen all 3 of those things inside of 10 minutes. She moved back to the desk. The question is what Holt needed badly enough to run a 3-year operation to get it. Marcus pulled up the final document. A county planning application submitted 8 months ago. A commercial development retail space office towers a structured parking facility projected across a large parcel in the northwest Tucson corridor. The site map showed the development footprint in pale blue. The eastern boundary of that footprint ran along a property line I recognized before Marcus said a word. That's my land, I said. Your garage sits at the anchor point of the entire project, Marcus said. Without that parcel, the development footprint doesn't connect to the main road access. The whole application falls apart structurally. He set his pen down. Meridian Capital Solutions is the listed developer. The room went quiet in the way that rooms do when the last piece of something large and terrible slides into place. Grace broke it first. A convicted felon operating a business on adjacent land is a zoning and licensing liability. A man in prison has no practical capacity to resist a forced sale or a legal acquisition proceeding. Holt didn't need to buy your garage, Ray. He just needed to remove you from it. I looked at the site map on the screen, at the pale blue footprint of a building that didn't exist yet pressing against the boundary line of everything I had built over 22 years. Carol knew, I said. It wasn't a question. She knew something, Grace said carefully. Whether she understood the full scope is separate from whether the financial records implicate her. The wire transfers will have moved through accounts she had visibility into. A forensic accountant can map that in detail. She looked at me steadily. When Carol sees that map, when she understands that Holt used her as a conduit the same way he used Derek, and that the transfer records make her legally exposed regardless of her intent, she will be standing at a decision point. She won't do it willingly, I said. She won't do it out of loyalty to you, Grace agreed. But she'll do it out of self-preservation. People like Carol don't fall on swords. When the alternative is an accessory charge and a financial fraud indictment, the sword gets very heavy very fast. She picked up her phone. I'm calling my forensic accountant today. We build the financial map first. Then we put it in front of her. I said nothing for a long moment. I looked at the planning application on the screen. At my garage, 22 years of early mornings and engine grease and work that meant something reduced to a rectangle on a site map sitting at the edge of someone else's projected revenue figures. Preston Holt had looked at everything I built and seen nothing but an obstacle with a boundary line. One thing I want to know, I said. When we find the connection between Holt and Tate, because there is one, I can feel it, what does that do to the case? Grace looked at me with the steady, unhurried expression of someone who had already thought 3 moves ahead. It turns a family dispute into a criminal conspiracy, she said. And that changes everything about how a jury sees your son's role in this. She paused. It also puts a police officer in the middle of a felony, which means the moment we can prove it, this case stops being handled at the precinct level. She left the implication where it was hanging in the cool air of the server room. I understood exactly what she meant. And so did Marcus, from the way he quietly saved every open file on the monitors without being asked. Whatever came next, we were no longer fighting a local problem. We were pulling a thread that led somewhere much larger, and someone on the other end of it was going to feel the tension very soon. Sandra Pruitt arrived at Grace's office on the morning of April 23rd, carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of quiet authority that only comes from spending 18 years untangling other people's financial lies for a living. She was 53 trim, with silver-framed reading glasses pushed up on her head, and a habit of speaking in complete, unhurried sentences that left no room for interpretation. Grace had worked with her on 4 previous cases. She had never once been wrong about where the money went or who had moved it. She spread 3 printed documents across the conference table without greeting anyone first. Grace sat to my left. Marcus stood near the door with his arms folded. The transfers are clean on the surface, Sandra said, tapping the first page with one finger. Regular amounts, legitimate-looking account labels processed through 2 intermediary holds before landing in Derek's personal checking account. Whoever structured this knew exactly how to make monthly payments look like consulting income. She looked up at me over the rim of her glasses. But consulting income requires a documented contract. Contracts leave paper trails. There is no contract anywhere in this chain. What does that mean legally? I asked. It means the payments are undocumented income. That exposes Derek to tax fraud at minimum unreported income from an unverified source. She tapped the second page. It also exposes whoever authorized the outgoing transfers. That person's electronic signature is on every single authorization. Traceable, time-stamped, and admissible. Grace leaned forward. Preston Holt, Acting through Meridian Capital Solutions, yes. Sandra slid the third document across the table. But here is what I found that you did not ask me to look for. A secondary account. Smaller transfers, different routing structure, same originating LLC. She looked directly at me and her voice didn't soften even slightly. The secondary account belongs to your wife, Mr. Callahan. Carol Callahan has been receiving funds from Meridian Capital Solutions for 22 months. The air in the room shifted the way it does when something you suspected becomes something you know. How much? I asked. My voice came out level because I needed it that way. $41,000 across 19 transfers, Sandra said. The amounts are deliberately irregular, varying between $800 and $3,800 per transfer. Irregular spacing is actually more sophisticated than regular deposits because automated fraud detection systems are calibrated to flag patterns. Someone with knowledge of those systems coached the spacing. Someone coached Carol, I said. Or coached whoever set up the account on her behalf, Sandra said. I cannot determine intent from transaction records alone. What I can determine is that the money moved the account is hers and the source is Meridian. Grace was already on her feet. I want Carol in this office today, before 5 o'clock. She won't come willingly, I said. She will when Douglas Fenn, whoever she's using as counsel, explains what $41,000 in undocumented income from a criminal conspiracy shell company does to her sentencing exposure. Grace picked up her phone. I'm calling her attorney's office right now. Carol arrived at 4:17 in the afternoon. She came with Douglas Fenn, mid-50s, a man whose practice lived in the comfortable territory of divorce settlements and property line disputes. He looked visibly out of his depth the moment he saw Sandra Pruitt's documents arranged across the conference table. Carol sat directly across from me for the first time since the night of March 15th. She wore a dark blue jacket and kept her hands folded on the table in front of her. On the surface, she looked composed, but I had been married to this woman for 31 years. I knew the difference between her real composure and the kind she assembled under pressure. This was scaffolding, not structure. Grace did not waste time. Carol, I'm going to be direct, because I think you're intelligent enough to prefer that. We have documented 19 transfers totaling $41,000 from Meridian Capital Solutions, a shell company controlled by Preston Holt, into an account registered in your name. We have financial records connecting Holt to Derek's involvement in the events of March 15th. We have physical evidence placing your son in Ray's garage the night before the Mustang was taken. She set her hands flat on the table. The choice in front of you right now is straightforward. You can be a witness or you can be a defendant. Those are the two options available to you. Fenn straightened in his chair. My client needs adequate time to review Your client has been receiving payments from a criminal conspiracy for 22 months, Grace said, without raising her voice even slightly. Time is not something she has in surplus. Carol looked at Fenn. Something passed between them, a silent conversation that lasted about 4 seconds. Then she looked back at Grace. What exactly do you need from me? Carol asked. Yeah, every communication with Preston Holt, or anyone representing him, Grace said. Every instruction you received about the transfers. Every conversation you had with Derek about his father prior to March 15th. She paused. And I need to know one specific thing. Who else knew that Ray had installed a kill switch on the Mustang? Carol looked down at the table. Her jaw moved slightly the way it does when a person is deciding how much of a truth to release at once. Then she looked up, and her eyes were steady in a way that told me she had already passed the point of no return inside herself. I need immunity from the accessory charge, she said. Grace looked at her without blinking. Cooperation agreement. Reduced exposure. I cannot guarantee full immunity without the prosecutor's involvement. But I can tell you that full cooperation is the only path that keeps you out of a courtroom as a defendant. Carol nodded once. Then she said, Preston approached me 14 months before any of this started. He told me Ray's garage was sitting on land that was worth 10 times what Ray knew. He said if Ray could be removed from the property legally, the development could move forward, and everyone involved would be compensated. She exhaled slowly. I thought it was going to be a buyout, a legal acquisition. I didn't know it was going to become what it became. When did you realize it had changed? Grace asked quietly. When Derek told me about the kill switch, Carol said. 3 weeks before March 15th. Who else knew about it? Grace pressed. Carol looked at me one more time, not with guilt, not with apology, but with the particular expression of someone releasing the last thing they were holding on to. Ben Tate, she said quietly. Preston paid him to manage the scene. The morning air in Grace's office felt thick, a pressurized silence that usually precedes a storm. I arrived well before 8, but Grace was already a fixture behind her mahogany desk. She looked as though she had been carved from the very wood she sat behind. 2 legal pads, their yellow pages suffocated by dense, frantic handwriting, lay before her. A ceramic mug sat at her elbow. The coffee inside was cold, filmed over, and completely untouched. Across from her sat Detective Hank Morse. He hadn't bothered to remove his jacket, and his posture was that of a man who had spent the last 12 hours rearranging the architecture of a nightmare rather than sleeping. His eyes were weary, but the pupils were sharp, fixed on the data spread across the desk. I sat down without waiting for an invitation. The chair creaked, a lonely sound in the quiet room. You already know about Tate, I said, my voice sounding like gravel under a boot. Morse turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were flat like river stones worn smooth by decades of cynical currents. Carol's attorney contacted my office at 9:17 last night. He stated, his tone devoid of inflection. She gave a full voluntary statement. It was recorded, transcribed, and initialed. He leaned forward, the fabric of his jacket bunching at the shoulders. But before I tell you what I've been sitting on independently, I need to hear your reaction to what she disclosed. I need to know if your internal compass matches the north we're currently finding. Ben Tate was not an accident. I said the words, feeling heavy in my mouth. He didn't just happen to be the first responder. He was placed at that scene like a piece on a board. Morse said, a grim shadow of a nod. He was. Grace's pen, which had been hovering over a legal pad, finally met the paper. She didn't write. She just pressed the tip down until it left a bleeding ink spot. Detective, if you have prior knowledge of Tate's involvement that exists independently of Carol's statement, I need to understand the provenance of that information. I need to know exactly when that knowledge was obtained and through what specific means. In a courtroom, chain of custody on information matters every bit as much as chain of custody on physical evidence. Morse didn't blink. Fair. 6 weeks ago, an internal affairs review flagged Tate on a minor administrative matter, irregular evidence handling in 2 prior Maricopa County vehicle cases. At the time, the flag was narrow. It looked like procedural sloppiness, not systemic corruption. It didn't connect to this situation. He paused, rubbing the bridge of his nose. However, when I ran the second crash site sweep and recovered the second wrench, the one that didn't belong to your garage, I went back to the logs. I pulled Tate's patrol unit GPS data for the night of March 15th. He stopped letting the date hang in the air like a ghost. His vehicle, Morse continued, was positioned on Route 77, tucked into a blind turnout within 400 meters of the crash site, exactly 11 minutes before the collision was even called in on the dispatch frequency. He was already there, I whispered. The betrayal felt like a cold blade in the ribs. A man wearing a badge had watched the wreckage settle before the smoke even cleared. His unit was there, Morse corrected with the detective's habitual caution. Placing him physically outside the vehicle at the exact moment of impact requires additional corroboration. But when you synthesize the GPS log with Carol's statement specifically that Tate received direct payment through a masked Meridian account to manage the scene and ensure certain variables were suppressed, that connection ceases to be a coincidence. It becomes something a prosecutor can hand to a grand jury. Grace tapped her pen against the desk, a rhythmic judicial sound. How much did Holt pay him to sell his soul? $18,000, Morse said. Routed through a personal LLC. Tate registered 26 months ago under the name Apex Logistics. The listed purpose security consulting services. Standard cover for a payoff. He finally picked up his coffee, looked at the cold surface, and set it back down with a grimace. The prosecutor on Ray's case is Dana Whitfield. You know her, Grace? She's a predator. She protects her office's prior decisions aggressively because she views a reversal as a weakness. But she's also a pragmatist. She follows evidence when it's presented cleanly enough that she can't ignore it. Grace folded her hands over her notes. What does our package look like right now, completely assembled? If we are going to storm the castle, I need to know the caliber of our ammunition. Morse began to count on his fingers, a tally of ruin. First, forensic soil confirmation from the University of Arizona. It's a definitive mineral match to the Cave Creek access road behind Holt's property. That was confirmed 4 days ago. Second, the ECU seat sensor data. It logged a 170-pound driver during the incident window. Ray, you're 210. Derek is 165. Third, backup garage footage from the neighbor's security system, placing Derek on the premises the night before the theft. Fourth, the programmable RF emitter recovered from behind the rear seat braced the device used to override the kill switch. Fifth, Carol's voluntary statement connecting Tate to the Meridian payment structure. Sixth, Tate's GPS log. And finally, Sandra Pruitt's financial map showing $41,000 moving from Meridian to Carol across 19 separate transfers. He looked at Grace, his eyes searching hers. Is that enough? It is enough to demand a formal prosecutorial review. Grace said, her voice regaining its professional steel. It is more than enough to file an immediate motion to dismiss the charges against Ray based on the discovery of exculpatory evidence and official misconduct. Then I want you in the room when I present this to Whitfield, Morse said. But there's a condition. You don't walk in as Ray's defense attorney. You walk in as the custodian of the independent evidence chain. We need to frame this as a collaborative correction of a systemic error. That distinction matters. It removes the appearance that this package was manufactured solely to benefit a client. Grace considered the tactical shift for exactly 4 seconds. Agreed. When? Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Whitfield's office downtown. Morse stood up, his joints popping. He buttoned his jacket with deliberate, slow movements. Then he turned to me. His expression shifted into something I'd never seen before, something almost paternal, or perhaps just deeply pitying. Ray, a word of warning. Whatever you are feeling about Derek right now, about the betrayal, about Carol, about the fact that your son let you take the fall for a crime he engineered, keep it buried. The moment this file hits Whitfield's desk, Derek becomes a material witness in a felony corruption case. Any contact between you and him that can be spun as witness intimidation will destroy everything we've built. It will give Whitfield the excuse she needs to bury the whole thing to protect the department. I understand, I said, though my heart was a chaotic mess of anger and grief. I need more than understanding, Ray. Morse said, his voice dropping an octave. I need a commitment. No phone calls. No accidental run-ins. No messages through third parties. You stay dead to him until the handcuffs click. You have it, I said. He held my gaze, searching for any sign of a crack in my resolve. Finding none, he walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to us, silhouetted against the hallway light. Get some rest tonight, he said. Tomorrow Whitfield either opens a door to the truth or she closes one we won't be able to pry open again. After he left, the silence in the office became heavy again. Grace and I sat among the folders and the legal pads, the paper trail of a life derailed. The evidence was spread out like the wreckage of a plane crash, a mechanical autopsy of a family's collapse. Is there anything left that you haven't told me? Grace asked. Her voice was quiet, stripped of its legal armor. Anything at all, Ray. I need the ghosts out of the closet before we walk into that room tomorrow. I looked at the grain of the wooden table following a dark line in the oak. I thought about the nights spent in the garage, the smell of grease and the sound of a socket wrench. 3 weeks before the Mustang disappeared. I began, my voice trembling slightly. Derek came to the garage. It was a Tuesday evening long after I'd flipped the sign to closed. He wasn't there to work. He was just lingering. He asked me one specific question. He wanted to know if the kill switch system I'd installed could be overridden remotely by a second transmitter, something on a different frequency. I paused, the memory surfacing with agonizing clarity. I told him no. I explained the security protocols. I told him the system was a closed-loop, single-frequency, single-user. I believed that when I said it. I thought I was teaching him something about craftsmanship. Grace was perfectly still, her pen poised. What did Derek do when you told him that? He didn't argue. I said, a hollow laugh escaping my throat. He just nodded. And then he smiled. It wasn't a big grin. It was just a slight upturn of the mouth, just enough to show he'd found the hole in the fence. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself it was just a kid's casual curiosity about high-end electronics. I have been lying to myself about that smile for 2 months. Grace lowered her pen and looked at me with a profound, quiet empathy. Tell me everything about that conversation, she said. Every word, every gesture, every detail of the equipment you were working on at the time. And I did. I poured it all out, the technical specs, the look in his eyes, the way the light hit the garage floor. I told her everything because the truth was the only thing I had left. It was a jagged, ugly thing, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to let anyone else carry the weight of it. Dana Whitfield's office occupied the northeast corner of the Pima County Attorney's building, and everything about it was deliberate. The desk was clear, except for 2 folders and a legal pad. The shelves behind her held case reporters and procedure manuals arranged by year, not alphabetically. She was 48, angular, with dark hair pulled back, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that the person who moves first in a room usually loses something. She did not stand when we entered. She looked at Morse first, then Grace, then me, each, for exactly the same duration, which told me she had already read everything in the file and was now reading us. Mr. Callahan, she said. Sit down. I sat. Grace sat beside me. Morse took the chair at the end of the table and opened his folder without speaking. Whitfield folded her hands. Detective Morse submitted a supplemental evidence package to my office at 7:45 this morning. I've spent the last hour reviewing it. She paused. I want to be clear about something before we proceed. This office filed charges against you based on the evidence available at the time of filing. That evidence has now been materially supplemented. What I do with that supplementation is governed by my obligation to pursue justice, not to protect a prior decision. We appreciate that clarity, Grace said. Don't appreciate it yet, Whitfield said. I haven't decided anything. She opened the first folder. The forensic soil report from the University of Arizona is solid. The mineral composition matched to the Cave Creek access road is within acceptable scientific parameters for evidentiary use. She turned a page. The ECU seat sensor data is useful, but imprecise. A defense attorney will argue the weight range has a margin of error that encompasses multiple individuals. I agree with that argument to a limited extent, which is why we're not presenting it as a standalone element, Grace said. We're presenting it as one link in a corroborating chain. I understand the strategy, Whitfield said without looking up. Let me finish. She turned to the second folder. The backup security footage placing Derek Callahan in the garage on March 14th is admissible and significant. The programmable RF emitter recovered from behind the rear seat brace is physical evidence connecting a deliberate act of premeditation to the vehicle. She set the folder down and looked at Morse. The GPS log placing Tate's unit en route 77 11 minutes before the crash call, that is the piece that concerns me most. Because it implicates a serving officer, Morse said. Because it implicates a serving officer, Whitfield confirmed. If I move on this, I am not just reviewing charges against Ray Callahan. I am opening an investigation into Officer Ben Tate, which means internal affairs, which means the department, which means this becomes significantly larger than a vehicle theft and obstruction case. She looked at me directly for the first time since we sat down. Mr. Callahan, I want to ask you something directly. In your conversation with Derek 3 weeks before March 15th, the one where he asked about the kill switch, did he give any indication of who was directing him? The question landed precisely. She had read every word of the supplemental package. He didn't name anyone, I said. But the question was too specific to be casual. He wanted to know if the system could be overridden by a second transmitter operating on a mirrored frequency. That is not a question a person asks out of general curiosity. No, Whitfield said. It is not. She was quiet for a moment. Here is where I am. The evidence package as assembled is sufficient for me to file a motion to dismiss the charges against you. I will do that. I am also opening a parallel investigation into Benjamin Tate and the financial connections between Preston Holt Meridian Capital Solutions and the events of March 15th. She looked at Grace. Your client is not a free man in the clear. He is a cooperating witness whose continued cooperation is a condition of the dismissal motion. If he contacts Carol outside of legally sanctioned channels or takes any independent action related to this case, the motion stops. Understood, Grace said. Mr. Callahan. Whitfield pressed. Understood, I said. Whitfield closed both folders and stood. The meeting was over. She extended her hand to Grace first, then Morse, then me. Her grip was firm and brief. One more thing, she said, looking at me as I reached the door. The second wrench. The one with Derek's blood found in the drainage ditch. She paused. The blood predates the crash. The lab confirmed the sample shows partial coagulation consistent with an injury sustained between 2 and 4 hours before the vehicle impact. She held my gaze. Your son was injured before he ever got in that car. I don't yet know what that means. But I think you should be prepared for the possibility that Derek's role in this is not entirely what it appears. I stood at the door with that sentence sitting in my chest, like a stone I hadn't expected to carry. Outside in the parking lot, Grace walked beside me without speaking for a long moment. Then she said, "She's going to move fast on Tate. When she does, Holt will know within hours." What does Holt do when he knows I asked? Grace looked at me over the roof of her car. He either runs or he reaches, and a man like Preston Holt, she said quietly, almost always reaches. I did not sleep well the night after the Whitfield meeting. I lay in the dark of my house, the house that sat 3 blocks from the garage, the house I had owned for 19 years, and I thought about what she had said about the blood on the second wrench, predating the crash by 2 to 4 hours. Derek injured before he ever sat behind the wheel of my Mustang. I had been building a case against my son for 2 months. I had been entirely justified in doing so. And now a prosecutor I had met for the first time that morning had planted a question inside me that I could not dislodge. At 6:47 the next morning, someone knocked on my front door. I knew before I opened it. The knock was 2 deliberate 3 measured beats, the way Derek had knocked on doors since he was a teenager. The habit of a person who wanted to announce himself without asking permission. I stood in the hallway for 5 seconds. Then I opened the door. Derek looked like he had not slept in longer than I had. He was thinner than the last time I had stood this close to him, and there was a bruise along his left jaw, faded to yellow-green at the edges, old enough to have been there for weeks. He was wearing a plain gray jacket, and his hands were visible at his sides, which I registered automatically the way any man does when he has spent time in situations where hands mattered. "I know I'm not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was different than it had been at the crash site. The calculation was gone from it. What was left underneath was something I had not heard from him in years, and I was not entirely prepared for it. "You need to leave," I said. "You know what's in motion right now. Any contact between us, I know what's in motion," he said. "That's why I'm here." He looked at me steadily. "I need 5 minutes. Not to argue, not to justify anything. 5 minutes." I stood in the doorway and did the calculation that Grace would have told me not to do. Then I stepped back and let him in. He stood in the front room and didn't sit down. I didn't offer him a seat. We stood on opposite sides of the room the way 2 people do when the distance between them is the only thing keeping the conversation from becoming something neither of them can manage. "The blood on the wrench," Derek said. I went very still. "You know about that," I said. "Whitfield's office contacted my attorney this morning," he said. "Standard disclosure." He looked down at the floor for a moment, then back up at me. "I need you to understand something about that night. About what happened before I ever touched your car. Eureka! Suka. Preston had a man at my apartment," he said. 2 nights before March 15th. He came to deliver a message, the kind of message that doesn't use words. He touched the side of his jaw lightly, the gesture of a man referencing something he had stopped being surprised by. I was told that if I didn't follow through, it wouldn't be me who paid for it. It would be you. Not legally. Not a lawsuit. His eyes didn't move from mine. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you for anything. But I need you to know that the night I drove your car, I was not acting freely." The room was very quiet. I looked at my son, at the faded bruise, at the exhaustion that had settled into the lines around his eyes, at the hands held still at his sides, and I felt something move through me that was not forgiveness and was not absolution. It was older and more complicated than either of those things. It was the particular grief of a father who sees too late, and all at once the shape of something that was done to his child while he was not looking. "Who else knows this?" I said. "My attorney, Derek, said, and now you." "You need to tell Grace," I said. "Today, not tomorrow. Today. You call her and you tell her every detail of what happened at your apartment, who the man was, what was said, and anything that connects it to Holt directly." I looked at him hard. "Can you do that?" Derek nodded. "Yes." "Then go," I said. "And Derek." He stopped at the door. Do not contact me again outside of legal channels. Not because I don't. I stopped. Started again. Just follow the process. Everything else waits until this is finished. He left without another word. I stood in the front room for a long time after the door closed, listening to the silence of a house that felt both emptier and less empty than it had the night before. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Grace. It read, Holt's attorney filed an emergency injunction this morning to block access to the Meridian financial records. He knows we're moving. I picked up the phone and called her back. We had less time than either of us had thought. The Pima County Courthouse marble was cold under my palms as Grace and I waited on that bench. I could feel the eyes of the clerk on us, but I kept my gaze forward. Inside courtroom 7, the air was stale with the scent of old law books and anxiety. At 9:30, sharp Judge Eleanor Vasquez took her seat. She had the kind of face that had seen too many lies and too few truths. Leonard Gantry, Holt's attorney, rose first. He spoke of privilege of fishing expeditions of harassment. His voice was smooth, practiced. Grace followed. She laid out the transfers, $41,000 to Carol, $18,000, to Tate the soil evidence, the coerced statement from Derek. She argued the shell company was a mask, and the mask was slipping. Vasquez listened, her fingers steepled. When Gantry called the soil evidence circumstantial, Grace's rebuttal was sharp. The mud on the victim's car matches the unique red clay from Holt's private road. That is not coincidence. That is connection. The judge's ruling came like a gavel to the chest. The subpoena was granted in part. We could access the accounts of Carol and Tate, but only for the 36 months prior to March 15, 2025. The broader corporate veil remained intact. It was a win, but a narrow one. We spilled into the hallway. Morse clapped me on the shoulder. We move fast. Holt's people will try to bury the money trail. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, stay away from the garage. This is your last warning. I showed it to Grace. Her jaw tightened. He's getting nervous. He should be, I said. Not yet, Morse corrected. We have a subpoena, not the records. And we don't have Holt. I deleted the message, but the words lingered. We needed to talk to Derek again. He'd mentioned a man at his apartment, a shadow with a voice. We needed a name, a face. Morse promised to arrange it, but his eyes were wary. Holt has resources, and he's running out of options. Back at the garage, Marcus had the laptop open, lines of code scrolling like digital rain. He'd been digging into Meridian's payment processor logs. They're not careful, he muttered. The processor keeps IP addresses, timestamps, user accounts. I can see someone at Meridian manually pushing money to Carol and Tate. Can you get the logs? Grace asked. I have them, but they're encrypted. I need to break the encryption to see the full data. How long? A few hours. I have a brute force tool, but I need the right key. And legal cover. These are private company records, not government databases. Grace nodded. I'll get you a subpoena for the processor's records. But move fast. Holt's attorney will claim privilege. She stepped aside to call the prosecutor's office. My phone rang. It was Carol. Ray, I just got a call from Holt's lawyer. He said if I testify, I'll be charged with conspiracy. He's bluffing, I said, but my stomach twisted. I'm scared, Ray. I know. But we've got the law on our side now. Grace hung up. Tate was just arrested. Morse's team picked him up an hour ago. Evidence tampering and conspiracy. That's a big move, I said. It puts pressure on Holt. He'll either cut a deal or go after anyone who can implicate him. My phone buzzed again. The same unknown number. You think you're winning, you're just making it worse. Stay out of it. I showed Grace. She exhaled sharply. He's escalating. We need you to testify, Carol. We need you to tell the grand jury everything payments Derek Holt's threats. Carol arrived an hour later, eyes red but jaw set. She told us about Holt's call, the veiled threats. I'll do it, she said. But I'm scared, Ray. Holt's not a man you cross lightly. I know, I said. But we're all in this together now. Grace's phone rang again. She listened, then hung up, her face hardening. Tate's attorney is filing a motion to suppress the arrest. They're arguing it was illegal. Of course they are, I said. They'll do anything to stall. We need to move faster, Grace said, turning to Marcus. How's the decryption? Marcus didn't look up from the screen. I've got a partial break. I can see some transaction logs. There's a pattern of transfers from Meridian to a shell company in Belize, and then from there to a personal account of Holt's. It's money laundering, plain and simple. Can you trace the Belize account? Grace asked. I'm working on it, but it's going to take time, and we don't have much of it. My phone buzzed again. Another text. You're playing with fire, Ray. Walk away now or you'll get burned. I showed it to Grace. He's not going to stop, she said. We need a protective order for Carol, and we need to put pressure on Holt's attorney. Maybe we can get him to flip. Good luck with that, I said. Gantry's not the type to flip. He's in Holt's pocket, maybe, Grace said. But even the most loyal soldiers have their breaking point. Just then, Morse walked in, looking grim. We've got a problem. Holt's attorney just filed an emergency motion to dismiss the entire case. He's arguing that the subpoena is still too broad and that we're harassing his client. When's the hearing? Grace asked. Tomorrow morning. And he's asking for an immediate injunction to stop us from accessing any of the financial records. He's trying to shut us down before we even get started, I said. We need to be ready, Grace said. Marcus, keep working. Carol, get your testimony straight. Ray, you need to be at that hearing. This is far from over. The next morning, the courthouse was colder, the silence heavier. We sat on the same bench, but the air felt different, charged like before a storm. Carol was beside me, her hand gripping a small notepad like a lifeline. Grace was reviewing her arguments, her brow furrowed. Morse stood near the door, talking quietly into his phone. At 9:30, Judge Vasquez took her seat. The courtroom filled with the rustle of papers and the low hum of anticipation. Leonard Gantry rose first. Your Honor, the prosecution's subpoena is a blatant overreach. It is a fishing expedition designed to harass my client, Mr. Preston Holt. The requested records are protected by attorney-client privilege and the right to privacy. We ask that the subpoena be quashed and that the case be dismissed with prejudice. Grace stood. Your Honor, the subpoena is narrowly tailored to the accounts of two individuals directly involved in a criminal conspiracy. The evidence we have, bank transfers, soil analysis, a coerced statement, paints a clear picture of fraud, obstruction, and witness tampering. The shell company structure is not a legitimate business. It is a veil for illegal activity. We are not seeking privileged communications. We are seeking transactional records that show the flow of money. And you have evidence of this conspiracy, Vasquez asked. We have bank transfers from Meridian to Carol Callahan, totaling $41,000, and to Officer Benjamin Tate, totaling $18,000, Grace said. We have forensic soil evidence linking the victim's vehicle to Holt's private property. We have a statement from Derek Callahan that he was coerced into participating. And now we have digital evidence tracing money from Meridian to a shell company in Belize, and from there to Holt's personal account. That is money laundering. Gantry stood again. Speculation, Your Honor. The soil evidence is circumstantial. The transfers could be legitimate. The digital evidence is encrypted and not yet admissible, and Mr. Callahan's statement is self-serving. The soil evidence is scientifically verified, Grace countered. The transfers occurred while Officer Tate was on duty and had access to the crime scene. That is not legitimate consulting, and the digital evidence is being decrypted as we speak. We will have the full logs before the grand jury. Judge Vasquez leaned forward. I've read the motions. I find that the prosecution has made a sufficient showing that the records may contain evidence of criminal activity. The subpoena is not overly broad. It is precisely targeted. Therefore, the motion to dismiss is denied. The subpoena stands. However, I will grant a protective order for Carol Callahan given the threats she has received. Mr. Gantry, you will have access to the requested records under the supervision of the court. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. A murmur went through the courtroom. Gantry's face darkened. He gathered his papers and left without a word. We filed out. Morse was waiting. That's a win, he said. But Holt won't take it lying down. Carol let out a breath she'd been holding. I can't believe it. I thought for sure he'd get the case dismissed. He tried, I said. But the truth has a way of coming out. Grace's phone rang. She answered, listened, then hung up, her expression unreadable. That was Marcus. He's broken the encryption. He's got the full logs from the payment processor. And he's traced the Belize account. It's a shell, but it leads to a bank in the Cayman Islands. Holt's name is on the account, but it's layered through 3 other companies. Can we get the Cayman records, I asked. We can try, Grace said. But it'll take time. And Holt knows we're coming. He'll try to move the money. Just then, my phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number, you won this round. But you haven't won the fight. Stay out of it or you'll regret it. I showed it to Grace. He's not done, she said. But we've got him on the run. Carol, you're safe. We've got a protective order, and we've got the digital evidence. We're going to grand jury next week. Carol nodded, but her eyes were still scared. What about Derek? He's still out there. Morse is handling it, Grace said. He's in protective custody. He'll testify. Morse joined us. Derek's statement is solid. He's willing to testify against Holt. And we've got the financial trail. We're building a case for money laundering, fraud, and conspiracy. What about Tate, I asked. He's still in custody. His motion to suppress the arrest is pending. But we've got enough to hold him. And his cooperation could be key. Grace looked at me. We need to talk Ray. Alone. We stepped aside. What is it, I asked. I'm worried about you, she said quietly. Holt's threats are getting more personal. He knows where you live, where you work. You need to be careful. I can take care of myself, I said. I know. But this isn't just about you anymore. It's about Carol, about Derek, about everyone caught in Holt's web. If he's willing to threaten you, he's willing to do worse. I'm not backing down, I said. She put a hand on my arm. I know. Just be smart. We rejoined the group. Marcus was already packing his laptop. I'm going to the office to start drafting the subpoena for the Cayman Bank, he said. I'll need your signature, Grace. I'll be there this afternoon, she said. Carol hugged me. Thank you, Ray, for everything. I'm not done yet, I said. As we left the courthouse, the sun was high and bright, but the air still felt heavy. I looked back at the marble steps at the building that held so many secrets and lies. We had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Holt was still out there, still dangerous, and he wasn't going to stop until he silenced everyone who could implicate him. My phone buzzed one more time. I glanced at the screen. The unknown number again. I almost didn't open it. But I did. The message was simple. It's not over. I'm just getting started. I deleted it, but the words echoed in my mind. Holt wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator. And predators never gave up their prey easily. I looked at Grace, at Carol, at Morse. They were all watching me, waiting. I nodded. Let's finish this. The message from Holt glowed on my phone screen, then vanished into the digital ether. I stood there in the parking lot of the Pima County Courthouse, the desert sun beating down like a judge's gavel, and felt the weight of those 6 words, I'm just getting started. I looked at Grace, Carol, and Morse. Their faces were tight with the same understanding this wasn't over. It had only begun to simmer. "We need to move," Grace said, her voice low. "Holt's not bluffing. He's desperate." Morse nodded. "I've already got a unit outside Carol's place. Derek's in a safe house. But Holt's got money. He can buy information, people." Carol shivered. "He called me last night. Said if I testified, he'd make sure I disappeared. He's threatening a witness." Morse said, already pulling out his phone. "That's another charge. I'll add it to the stack." We piled into Grace's sedan and headed back to the office. The silence in the car was heavy, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Mine were on Holt's reach, how far it extended, and who else might be in his pocket. Back at the office, Grace called a war council. Marcus was already there, laptop open, lines of code reflecting off his glasses. "I've got something," he said, without preamble. "The digital trail goes deeper than we thought. Meridian wasn't just laundering money through Belize. There's a second shell, Apex Frontier Development, registered in Nevada. It's linked to Holt through a series of bearer bonds and crypto payments." "Can you prove Holt knew?" I asked. "The payment logs show a direct transfer from Apex to a Cayman account in Holt's name 2 days before the crash. But here's the kicker. There's also a transfer from Apex to a P.O. box in Phoenix. The same P.O. box that received monthly payments from Meridian to a consulting fee for Officer Tate." Grace's eyes narrowed. Holt was paying Tate through 2 shells. "That's deliberate obfuscation. And there's more," Marcus said, clicking his mouse. "I decrypted the Belize bank's server logs. Someone accessed the account from an IP address in Scottsdale yesterday, right after the injunction hearing. They tried to initiate a wire transfer out of the country." "Holt," I said. "Or someone working for him," Marcus said. "The transfer was flagged by the bank's compliance system. It's frozen now, but it shows he's still trying to move the money." Morse stood, his jaw clenched. "We need to hit him again. Hard. The grand jury is next week. I want to present the digital evidence, the money trail, the threats. I want to put Holt in handcuffs before he can bury us." Grace was already drafting a motion. "I'll ask the judge to compel Holt to testify before the grand jury. If he takes the fifth, it's admissible as consciousness of guilt. And I'll request an emergency hearing on the witness intimidation charge." Carol spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "I'm ready to testify. I want him to see my face when I tell the truth." "You'll have protection," Morse said. 24/7. "But Carol, you need to understand. Holt may try to contact you again. Don't answer. Don't engage. Call the hotline immediately." She nodded, but fear lingered in her eyes. The rest of the day was a blur of affidavits, subpoenas, and strategy sessions. Marcus worked on a visual timeline of the money laundering, something the grand jury could understand. Grace fine-tuned her questions. Morse coordinated with the DA's office. At 5, I slipped out to get some air. I walked to a nearby bar, the kind of dimly lit joint where the glasses were always half full and the conversations were half lies. I ordered a whiskey neat and sat in a corner booth trying to piece together the puzzle. Holt wasn't just a real estate developer. He was a spider at the center of a web, and we were flies buzzing too close to the light. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. "Ray Callahan," a voice said, smooth as silk and cold as a grave. "I've been reading about you. Quite the crusader." "Holt," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. "I want to make you an offer," he said, ignoring my identification. "Drop the case. Withdraw the subpoena. Tell your little lawyer friend to back off. In return, you get to keep your garage. Your son gets to walk free. And your wife doesn't have an accident." My blood ran cold. "You're threatening my family. I'm offering you a way out." He said, his tone almost reasonable. "This doesn't have to end badly. Just walk away." "I'll see you in court," I said, and hung up. I sat there, the whiskey untouched, my mind racing. Holt knew where I lived. He knew about Derek. He knew about Carol. The realization settled like a stone in my gut. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about survival. I called Grace. He just called me. Holt. Yeah, he offered me a deal. Walk away or something might happen to my family. There was a pause. We need to get you and Carol and Derek into protective custody. Now. I'm not running, I said. I'm not asking you to run, she said. I'm asking you to be smart. Holt's capable of anything. We need to move fast. I hung up and looked at my reflection in the dark window. The face staring back was older than my years, eyes hardened by too many lies and too much loss. I finished the whiskey and headed back to the office. The night was a long one. Grace filed the motion for Holt to appear before the grand jury. Morse doubled the security detail. Marcus worked on encrypting the digital evidence, creating a backup that could be released if anything happened to us. At 2 a.m, I finally crashed on the office couch. My dreams were fractured images of red mud, of a wrench covered in blood, of Holt's face smiling as the garage burned. I woke to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Morse. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice tight. "Someone broke into Carol's safe house. She's gone." The safe house was on the outskirts of Tucson, a nondescript stucco bungalow surrounded by saguaros and silence. When Morse and I arrived, the front door was ajar, the lock splintered. The officers on scene were tense, weapons drawn. "We found this," one of them said, handing me a note. The paper was cheap, the handwriting spiky. "She's with us. Back off or she disappears for good." I felt my stomach drop. Carol was gone. Grace arrived, her face pale. "We need to call the judge. Now. This is witness tampering on a whole new level." Morse was already on the phone with the DA. "We're issuing an Amber Alert. Every cop in the state is looking for her." But I knew Holt. He wouldn't leave a trail. He'd have her in a private jet before sunrise. The office became a war room. Grace argued for an emergency hearing to admit the intimidation as evidence. Marcus worked on tracing the IP from Holt's last digital incursion, hoping to find a location. I sat at my desk, staring at the blank wall, trying to think like Holt. "He'll take her out of the country," I said finally. "Belize, the Caymans, somewhere with no extradition." "We've already alerted Interpol," Morse said. "But without a location, we're shooting in the dark." Grace rubbed her temples. "We need to move the grand jury up. Today. I'll ask the judge to convene immediately. We'll present what we have, the digital evidence, the money trail, the threats, and now the abduction. We'll ask for an indictment on multiple counts, including kidnapping. And if we don't get her back," I asked, my voice hoarse. "Then we keep going." Grace set her eyes fierce. "We don't let Holt win." The judge agreed to convene the grand jury at 3 that afternoon. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, cops, Holt's entourage. Holt himself sat at the defense table looking cool and collected, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than facing a kidnapping charge. The grand jury was a strange beast. No judge, no public. Just 16 ordinary people, a court reporter, and the prosecutors. Grace and Morse would present the evidence. Holt's lawyer Gantry would try to poke holes. Grace called Marcus first. He explained the digital trail in layman's terms: shell companies, crypto payments, IP addresses. He showed the timeline, the transfers, the access logs, the frozen wire attempt. The grand jurors leaned forward, intrigued. Then Morse took the stand. He detailed the investigation, the threats, the break-in at the safe house. He played the recording of Holt's phone call to me, the one where he offered the deal. "The defendant is aware of the investigation," Morse said. "He's trying to influence the witness and the process." Gantry cross-examined, trying to cast doubt. "You have no physical evidence linking my client to the break-in." "We have motive," Morse shot back. "And we have opportunity." The IP from the digital incursion traces to a server in Holt's office building. Next, I testified. I told them about the red mud, the halon residue, the wrench, the blood. I identified Holt in the courtroom. I told them about the phone call, the threats, the fear in Carol's eyes. Gantry tried to trip me up. You're a mechanic, not a detective. How can you be sure? I know what I saw, I said. And I know what Holt is capable of. Finally, Grace called the lead officer on the safe house breach. He confirmed the forced entry, the missing person report, and the note. The victim is Carol Callahan, wife of the defendant's former business partner, the officer said. We believe she's been kidnapped. The grand jury deliberated for less than an hour. The foreperson handed the indictment to the judge. The room held its breath as the clerk read the charges: money laundering, fraud, obstruction of justice, witness, intimidation, and kidnapping. Holt didn't flinch. He just smiled as if he'd expected it all along. The judge ordered Holt held without bail. As the marshals led him away, he looked at me over his shoulder, his eyes promising retribution. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters rushed for the door. Grace Morse and I stood there exhausted but victorious. We got him, Morse said, clapping me on the back. We got the indictment, Grace corrected. But we still have to convict. And we still have to find Carol. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. Holt's smile haunted me. He hadn't looked defeated. He'd looked amused. We celebrated that night at a quiet bar, just the three of us. We drank to Carol, to Derek, to the truth finally coming out. But the celebration was bittersweet. Carol was still missing. Holt was in jail, but his organization was still out there. At midnight, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. You think you've won, Holt's voice said, smooth as ever. But this is just a pause. I have friends in high places. I'll be out soon. And when I am, I'm coming for you, Ray. And this time I won't miss. The line went dead. I looked at Grace and Morse, who were watching me. He's still playing games, I said, trying to sound calm. Grace's eyes were hard. We'll get him for the kidnapping. That's federal. He won't be out for a long time. He's got money, I said. And money talks. Morse finished his drink. Then we need to make sure the evidence is airtight. We need to find Carol. And we need to make sure Holt never sees the light of day again. I nodded, but sleep wasn't coming easy that night. Holt's words echoed in my mind. I'll be out soon. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the desert wind howl outside, and wondered if we'd just unleashed a monster we couldn't control. 2 days after Derek's name appeared in Whitfield's federal referral, Preston Holt stopped treating him like an accomplice and started treating him like a loose end. At 3:12 in the morning, I was sitting alone at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had not touched. Sleep had become something I only borrowed for a few minutes at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same images: Derek on the curb beside the wrecked Mustang, Carol sitting beside Detective Morse, instead of me and Officer Tate lifting that wrench from my car like he had known exactly where to find it. Then my phone lit up. No caller ID, no number, just a video file. Beneath it were 6 words. Come alone or your son disappears. For several seconds I did not move. Then I opened the file. The screen showed a dim concrete room with a single hanging light. Derek sat in a metal chair beneath it. His wrists were bound in front of him with plastic ties. He was not bleeding. He was not badly beaten. But the fear in his eyes was real. I had seen my son lie before. I had seen him fake panic at the crash site. This was different. This was the face of a man who finally understood that the people he served had never considered him family. A voice came from somewhere off camera. You always did build useful things, Ray. Cars, businesses, sons. Preston Holt. My hand tightened around the phone. Derek looked toward the voice, then back at the camera. Dad, he said, his voice shaking. Don't come here. Whatever he tells you, don't. The video cut off. I stood so fast, the chair scraped across the tile. For 1 second, every warning Grace had given me disappeared. Every motion, every subpoena, every legal step we had taken meant nothing beside one fact. My son was tied to a chair. I grabbed my keys and was halfway to the door when my phone rang again. Grace Norris. I answered with one hand on the doorknob. "Do not leave your house," she said. "He has Derek." "I know. Morse received the same file 30 seconds after you did." That stopped me cold. "What?" "Morse received a copy through an anonymous upload. So did Whitfield's office. Holt wanted law enforcement to know you received it." I looked back at the frozen video. Why would he do that? "Because he wants a record," Grace said. "He wants everyone to see the threat, then see you react to it. If you leave alone, he can turn your rescue attempt into obstruction witness interference or proof that you and Derek were coordinating." "He's my son." "I know," she said. "But right now, he is also a material witness, a possible co-conspirator, and the bait Holt is using to pull you out into the open." I hated that word because I knew it was true. A second call came in. Grace merged it. Detective Hank Morse's voice filled the line, rough and awake. "Ray, tell me exactly where you are." "My kitchen." "Stay there. I'm not going to sit here while Holt. You are going to sit there." Morse cut in. "Because the second you move without us, Holt gets the reaction he built this for." I looked down at the keys in my hand. The metal teeth pressed into my palm. "You saw the video." "I saw it. Then you saw his face." "I did," Morse said. "And I'm telling you clearly, if you go after him alone, you may lose him and destroy the case at the same time." For 30 years, I had trusted instinct. A strange engine noise, a vibration through a steering column, a car drifting half an inch too wide in a corner. Instinct had saved me more times than I could count. But instinct had also sent me to the crash scene on March 15th. Instinct had put me exactly where Derek and Tate needed me. I could not make that mistake again. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Grace answered first. "Forward the original file to me and Morse. Do not edit it. Do not screenshot it. Do not send it to Marcus. Do not open it again after you forward it. Chain of custody matters." I looked at Derek's frozen face. Then I forwarded the file. It felt like abandoning him, even though I knew it was the only thing that might save him. At 3:49 a.m., Grace arrived at my house. Her hair was pulled back her face, pale with lack of sleep, but her eyes were sharp. She placed an evidence envelope on the table and held out her hand. "Phone." I gave it to her. She sealed it, labeled it, signed across the flap, then had me sign beneath her name. "This preserves the original file on your device," she said. "Morse will get a forensic copy under warrant." "Do you always sound this calm when someone threatens a man's child?" "No," she said. "Only when the man is about to do something that could ruin everything." At 4:06 a.m., Morse called again. "We have a partial location pattern," he said. The upload was routed through a private relay, but the first tower handshake came from an industrial zone south of Tucson. Old cannery property near East Drexel, closed for years. Grace put the call on speaker. "Do you have enough for a warrant?" she asked. "Not alone. But combined with the threat, Derek's witness status, the active corruption investigation, and Holt's connection to Meridian, yes. I'm waking a judge now." "How long?" "As long as it takes to do it right." I gripped the back of a chair. "And if Holt moves him before then?" "Then we track the next move," Morse said. "But if we go in without the warrant, and that building is tied to Holt through a shell company, his lawyers will spend months arguing illegal search. I'm not giving him that." I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand speed over procedure. But that was exactly what Holt was counting on. So I said nothing. At 5:31 a.m., the warrant was signed. At 5:47, Morse sent units toward the cannery. At 6:02, Grace received confirmation that Whitfield's office had been notified and that the operation would be logged as part of the broader conspiracy investigation. No shortcuts, no private heroics, no emotional mistake Holt could weaponize later. I sat at the kitchen table while other men went to find my son. Those were the longest minutes of my life. Grace sat across from me, silent, her phone face up between us. Every few minutes it buzzed with an update. Unit staged, rear entrance covered, thermal movement inside, possible hostage location. Then nothing. For 7 minutes there was nothing. I heard the refrigerator hum. I heard a truck pass outside. I heard my own breathing, uneven and ugly. Then Grace's phone rang. Morsi. She answered and put it on speaker. For a second all I heard was movement. Voices in the background. A radio squawk. A door banging somewhere. Then Morse said, "Ray." I stood. "Tell me." "Derek is alive." My knees almost failed. Morse continued. "He's being evaluated by paramedics. Conscious. Frightened. No major visible injuries. He's asking for you." For one impossible second, I was back in the garage 20 years earlier, watching a little boy with grease on his cheek ask if he could hold the flashlight. Then Morse spoke again. "Holt is gone." I opened my eyes. "What do you mean, gone?" "We believe he left before entry. Rear access tunnel through an old service corridor. We're checking cameras and nearby traffic now." Grace's face hardened. He expected the warrant. Or he expected Ray to come alone and had an exit plan either way, Morse said. "He never meant to stay," I said. No, Morse answered. "But he left something." Grace went still. "What?" "A hard drive. Hidden behind a breaker panel in the room where Derek was held. It was not left by accident." "What's on it?" I asked. "We don't know yet. It is being packaged now. Certified forensic examiner only. No one touches the contents until the warrant is expanded." "Can I see Derek?" "Not yet," Morse said. The answer hit harder than I expected. "He's my son. He is also a material witness, a potential co-conspirator, and now a kidnapping victim. Any contact has to be cleared through counsel and documented." For a moment I hated the law, hated its timing, hated the way it could stand between a father and a son who had just been pulled from an abandoned building. Then I remembered the Mustang. I remembered what happened the last time I let emotion drive. "Is he safe?" I asked. "Yes," Morse said. "For now." By sunrise, the sky over Tucson had turned pale and hard. Grace stood at my kitchen counter, already preparing the next motion. I walked to the window and looked toward the driveway. My truck sat there untouched. For once, I had not run straight into the trap. For once, Holt had opened a door in front of me, and I had refused to walk through it blind. But my son was alive because strangers with warrants had reached him before I could. And Preston Holt was gone because he had planned for that too. I thought the night the Mustang disappeared was the moment this story began. I was wrong. That was only the first machine Holt turned against me. Now he had used my son the same way. And somewhere inside a hard drive hidden behind a breaker panel, the machine had finally started to expose itself. By noon, Derek was in protective custody at a secured hospital wing, and I still had not been allowed to see him. Morse said it was procedure. Grace said it was necessary. The prosecutor said Derek was now both a victim and a material witness, which meant every conversation around him had to be controlled, recorded, and cleared through counsel. I understood all of it. I hated all of it. Grace drove me to her office instead of the hospital. I sat across from her while she placed 3 folders on the table and waited for me to stop staring at the wall. "Ray," she said, "look at me." I did. "You did not lose him this morning." I swallowed. "Then why does it feel like I did?" "Because Holt wanted you to feel that way. He used Derek the same way he used the Mustang, the garage, the warrant process, Carol's fear, and Tate's badge. Every piece was meant to make you react before you thought." She opened the first folder. Inside were printed stills from the cannery raid. The metal chair, the hanging light, the breaker panel where the hard drive had been hidden. "Morse's team logged everything under warrant," she said. "No private searches, no shortcuts. That means whatever is on that drive can survive court." "What is on it?" "We don't know yet. A certified forensic examiner is imaging it now. Not Marcus, not us. Court-authorized procedure only." That mattered. I knew it mattered. but my mind kept going back to Derek's face in that video. At 2:15 p.m., Morse arrived with a sealed evidence summary. He looked tired in a way sleep would not fix. "The drive is encrypted," he said, sitting down. "But the directory labels are visible. Meridian payment logs, development correspondence, police contact notes, and one folder labeled Callahan_final. Grace did not move. I felt the room shrink. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means Holt kept a master file," Morse said. "Maybe insurance, maybe arrogance, maybe both." Grace leaned forward. "Can your examiner access it?" "Not yet. But we don't need the full contents to act on what we already have. The visible directory structure alone supports expansion of the warrant. Whitfield is signing off on a federal referral." "Federal?" I asked. Morse nodded. "Public corruption, interstate financial transfers, shell companies, possible obstruction, and a staged homicide frame-up connected to a commercial development. This is no longer just a local prosecution." For the first time that day, I felt the ground under me shift in the right direction. Then Morse slid a photograph across the table. It showed a narrow hallway inside the cannery. On the floor near the exit was a black phone cracked at the corner. "We recovered this near the rear door," he said. "Preliminary check shows it received one call during the raid window." Grace looked at the photo. "From Holt." "No," Morse said. "From Carol." The name hit me harder than it should have. Grace's eyes narrowed. "Carol called the burner phone while Derek was being held. 31 seconds before the tactical team entered," Morse said. "The call lasted 8 seconds. I stared at the photo. What did she say? We don't know yet. The phone is locked, but the call record is there. The old version of me would have defended her. Would have found a reason. Would have said Carol was scared, confused, manipulated. That version of me had died in interview room B." Grace closed the folder slowly. "If Carol warned Holt, her cooperation agreement is in danger." Morse nodded. "Whitfield is already reviewing it." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, Tucson looked painfully normal. Cars moving, people crossing the street, sunlight on glass. The world had a cruel talent for continuing while your life came apart. Behind me, Grace said, "Ray, there is something else." I turned. She held up one final page. It was a copy of an email recovered from a Meridian server through subpoena. The sender name was hidden behind a coded account, but the subject line was visible. "Asset removal complete after conviction." My throat tightened. Grace read the first line aloud. "Once Callahan is remanded, initiate acquisition pressure through zoning liability and creditor distress." No one spoke for a moment. Then Morse said what all of us were thinking. "They never needed you dead, Ray. They needed you legally ruined." I looked at the page again. At the word conviction. At the calm corporate language wrapped around the destruction of my life. Derek had betrayed me. Carol had sold pieces of the truth. Tate had worn a badge into a crime scene he helped shape. But Preston Holt had done something worse than all of them. He had looked at my entire life and reduced it to a business obstacle. I sat back down. "What happens now?" I asked. Grace's voice was steady. "Now we stop reacting. We file to revoke Carol's cooperation protections unless she gives a complete supplemental statement. Morse expands the warrant. Whitfield freezes the Meridian-linked accounts. And you do not contact Derek until his attorney clears it." I looked at Morse and Holt. Morse's face hardened. "Holt thinks he disappeared this morning," he said. "But people like him always leave through the door they prepared in advance. We're already watching it." That night I went home without seeing my son. I stood in the garage after dark, looking at the empty space where the Mustang used to sit. For months I had believed the car was the beginning of the story. I was wrong. The Mustang had only been the first witness. And now, piece by piece, every silent machine Holt had used against me was starting to testify. You know, sometimes I sit on the porch of my old garage and watch the sunset bleed over the desert, and I wonder how things got so tangled. I've lied, I've stolen, I've pointed a gun at a man who thought he owned the world. I'm not a hero, I'm just a mechanic who loved his family enough to get blood on his hands. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that evil doesn't always wear a black hat. It wears a suit and ties its shoes with shell companies. And God help me, I've seen what happens when good men look the other way. So here's my advice. Don't wait until the wolves are at your door. Stand up before the ground disappears beneath your feet. Speak out before the silence becomes your sentence. I ignored the red flags, the whispers, the way my gut twisted every time Holt smiled. I thought I could fix it all with a wrench and a prayer. I was wrong. These grandpa stories aren't just about me. They're about every family story who's ever been pushed around by someone with more money than morals. This family story is a warning, a testament, a promise that the truth, however battered, still matters. If you've been following this grandpa stories, you know the cost of silence. You know that justice isn't a straight line. It's a jagged, bloody path you walk one step at a time. If you believe in that fight, leave a comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more grandpa stories that don't pull punches. Let's keep the conversation alive. Thank you for listening. And remember, the next chapter may contain fictional elements crafted for educational purposes. If that's not your thing, feel free to close the book and find a story that suits you better.